Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to weltsound. Today I want to talk to you about drums. And I have two examples. I have a house loop and I have a techno loop. And I want to talk to you about groove and texture on drums, how you can create it and how important it is, even though it's subtle, to make a track danceable, to make the people move. Alright guys, let's jump right in. I want to show you the house loop first. It's all about the groove here, and I disabled everything that gives groove here. So we're going to talk about this in a moment, but first let's have a listen. It's only kick, hi-hats, a clap, a rim, and a bass line, just to give it more of a groovy feeling, and the bass line is actually really important for the groove too. So let's just have a listen here first. You can hear that there's all the important elements that you have for house. The typical 909 open hi-hat, we have a cool clap, the bass line, typical square bass. But some groove is missing, and now I want to show you the other loop with everything turned on, all the groovy elements, so to say, and let's see how you can hear the difference. First of all, and that's super important, there was no sidechain at all in the first loop. So I activated sidechain on all the instruments that need it, which is mainly the bass line here, but also the 16th note hi-hat, and actually that rim here too, because it's going over the kick as well. And it's crazy how that already makes a huge difference. Let's just have a listen at kick and bass with and without the sidechain. Right, you can feel the pumping, the kick has space, that's obviously also for mixing reasons, but still it also is very important for the groove. And that's actually one of the first things that you can take from this video. Sidechain is important for the groove, not only for mixing. So that's why we also sidechain other elements. For example, let's have a listen at the hi-hats here. And let me turn off the sidechain first. Right, you can hear how when the sidechain is turned off, the 16th note hi-hat just rolls over everything and doesn't really go with the groove of the track. And that's really important here. The next huge difference is within the 16th hi-hat. That's just a basic 16th note hi-hats, no velocity, no movement, and in the second loop, actually, there was a little groove implemented. It's a groove from Ableton Groove Pool. And if we commit it, we can see how it drastically changes the position of some of the notes. And there's also, not from the Groove Pool, but I did it myself, just a basic rhythm. So we took some velocity down here, some up, and that just gives a little more kind of groove to it as well. If we have a listen here in solo, it sounds really weird. Right? It sounds like someone didn't really manage to quantize its stuff. But if we like put the hi-hats and maybe the kick here, now you couldn't really tell that the notes were too much apart. It just feels like it has another rhythm and probably a cooler rhythm. So that's a very important point here. The next thing is about the offbeat hi-hat. We have two here. It's a closed 909 and a open 909. And you can see that there's some fill notes here and here. And if we have a look at the first loop over here, it's just a plain offbeat. And those fills, they actually also give a lot of rhythm. And we could even go further and put groove on those, so we could move them around a little bit, you know, maybe like this, like this. That sounds a lot like house, obviously. It's a common technique in that genre. And yeah, very important to have this in your house track to make it groovy, but it also helps in like techno and other genres to have those little fill elements that just keep the track interesting. Also nice for grooves is having delays and echoes, because they are rhythmic as well, and that's really important. They do not only give space and dimension to a track, they also give rhythm. And if we check out the rhythm here without the echo, it's really basic, but if we add the echo here, you can hear that it's ping pong echo, so it switches from left to right, which is already pretty interesting and also gives a nice groove. And it just changes the flow here. It just makes it much more interesting, right? Lastly, and that's also very important, a lot changed in the bass line. Mainly, if we have a look at the notes here, the velocity, right? So here everything is at maximum velocity. There's no movement in the bass line. And here the velocities are different. And I just want to have a quick look with you at Serum. We can see that the volume of Serum is completely triggered by the velocity. So that's here, right? The global amp is like the volume of Serum. And then again, we have the velocity mapped to the filter cutoff just a little bit, but this changes the way the bass line is grooving. You know, if we have a listen to the bass line in the beginning, and then here, there's little accents that make it more interesting. There's no limits to what you map to velocity on your synthesizer, and you should really experiment with everything that comes to your mind. Let's just randomly go for distortion here, and we take a tape saturation here with a little bit of drive, and we put the velocity on the mix. Not too much, just a little bit, and let's see how this affects the sound. You can already see the possibilities are endless here. You can map the velocity to almost anything here in Serum, and it's a nice way to make bass lines and lead sounds more interesting over time. Alright guys, round number 2 is about techno. I have a loop here. Let's just have a listen first. The acid line is actually only there to have more feeling for the track, so we can also leave that away for now. And what you can hear is there's no texture on the sounds at all. They all sound very dry. And that's not only about reverb and dimension in general, that's also about what I call texture. And that means that sounds need like frequencies on top of the actual sound. So a lot of times you would put distortion on the sound to make it more textured, because it adds maybe harmonic or maybe not too harmonic frequencies, and therefore makes the sound more interesting. In this loop, almost every sound got a little texture processing by me, and I'm going to activate all this now, and let's have another listen here, without the acid line though first. Let's have a listen to what happened here track by track, starting with the kick drum. Through that audio effect rack, there are several layers coming on top of the kick drum. So first there's the dry chain. It got boosted a little in the low end because I boosted the low frequencies here just a little bit, because the other chains added too much high frequencies, so we had to balance this out. Let's have a listen at the other chains. First, the so-called thump. So basically this is only a lot of overdrive on the mid-bass frequencies, low mids I would say, and then some EQing, very simple, not too heavy, just to give this dirty feeling to it. And then there's another layer, and that's a little higher. What's really important here is that the sound gets more sustain through that chain, and this sustain is so noisy and dirty that it really adds a lot of texture. The next element we're talking about is the 16th note hi-hat. So what I did here is I added redux and then an LFO that moves the downsample just a little bit up and down. And then I took away all the lows because there's a lot of lows coming through the bit crush that we don't want. And it gets like almost, it's like a little melody here that's really interesting. So let's have a listen. And we could go super crazy here. We could lift this up way more. Or we could go faster, slower. Right, so this is already like a crazy groove and a lot of crazy texture. I think it was cool like on the halves. Not too crazy and not too much. Next track is one of the offbeat hi-hats, and this one is really easy. I have an echo here, and this echo is just giving a little extra rhythm here. It's almost like we could put this in the groove section of drums, but still it's also a texture because it also changes the tone a little bit. It gets stereo because of the little modulation here. And actually this is a little trick I'm using a lot. I put echoes dry wet down to almost 0, like in this case 12%, and then I put up the input gain. So input only affects the wet signal here. So the wet signal gets louder, even though it's only 12%, it's much louder than 12% usually would be. And then it also gets a little saturation through the input. So that's really interesting for little sound design tricks. And also on the second offbeat, I have a little reverb chain here. It's a very distorted reverb, and it's not really dimension here, it's more texture, you can hear it. By the way, it's really interesting how the sustaining transient here and the reverb of the hi-hat interact with each other. I think that's really cool. And last but not least, there is a clap. There's just a little bit of overdrive to add some harmonic in the high frequencies. And then again, there's this trick with the low dry wet ratio, but then the input raised, and this time just a little different from the rhythm. So it sounds like this, right? It's especially cool because it's super stereo and therefore changes the feeling of the clap and the whole groove here very much. So let's have a final listen again with the acid sound. Fair to say that texture is very important for drums, especially in techno, I would say, but generally speaking, in every genre, it's really important. I hope you liked this little video about drums. If you ever need some more drum samples or drum loops, just check out the weltsound page. They have a lot of samples to offer from different artists and also some samples by myself. There's also a link in the description to download 5 drum samples coming from my artist pack that's coming up soon on weltsound, so if you want to check them out, now's your chance.